Welcome to the latest edition of the ZapSec Modernization Series. I'm James Camerata, Vice President at ZapSec, and today I'm joined by Hitesh Kumar, Senior Security Architect. We're going to discuss OT-IT convergence and the segmentation vacuum. In December 2025, a wiper malware attack hit the Polish energy sector and targeted renewable energy infrastructure. The attack exploited vulnerable edge devices and remote terminal units that were connected to the enterprise network for monitoring. CISA issued an alert in February. That attack started in IT, and it reached OT because the segmentation between the two did not exist.
And that's not an isolated case. The Force Scout ICS vulnerability report from this year, it found that 82% of ICS advisories are now rated either high or critical. And ransomware as a service groups are actively expanding into OT targets. But here's the part that most security content misses. The problem is not that OT environments are being attacked. The problem is that segmentation assumptions that protected them for decades have collapsed and nothing has replaced them.
For much of the history of industrial security, the primary control was the air gap. The OT network was physically isolated from the IT network. There was no connectivity and no shared infrastructure. The security model was, if nothing can reach it, nothing can attack it. And for a long time, that worked. But the business changed. Operations teams wanted remote monitoring. Finance wanted real-time production data for forecasting. Engineering wanted predictive maintenance analytics running in the cloud. Leadership wanted dashboards. And one by one, connections were built between OT and IT. Each one was a reasonable business request. Each one was a hole in the air gap.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also important to remember that these connections, they were not designed with security in mind. They were designed for data flow. So a historian server pulls data from PLCs and pushes it to a cloud analytics platform. And a remote access portal lets vendor connect to a control system for maintenance tasks. And an IoT sensor on the plant floor sends telemetry data to an IT hosted monitoring dashboard. So each of these connections create a path from IT to OT or vice versa. And in almost every assessment we do, those paths are either unsegmented or they are segmented, but with a simple IP-based firewall rules that we talked about in other episodes. So there's no identity-aware policy, there's no device posture validation, and there's no application layer inspection for these industrial protocols. And with the air gap gone, nothing architecturally has replaced it, which has created this vacuum.
I know what some people watching this are thinking. We covered segmentation previously. We covered identity-aware enforcement. Why does OT segmentation need its own discussion? What makes it different?
Three things that make OT fundamentally different from IT. And they change the entire approach to segmentation, right? First, you cannot deploy agents on most OT devices. So a PLC running 15-year-old firmware, a SCADA controller from a vendor who last updated their software in 2018, a safety instrument system that was certified for a specific configuration, and it cannot be modified without recertification. So these devices do not run endpoint agents, right? You cannot install a security client on them, and any enforcement has to happen at the network level, not on the device itself. And second, the protocols are different. IT runs mostly on HTTP, TLS, SSH, while OT networks run Modbus, DNP3, and other protocols, right? And most IT security tools do not understand these protocols. They cannot inspect them and they cannot write policy against them. So a standard firewall sees Modbus traffic as opaque data on a TCP port. It cannot distinguish between a legitimate read command and a write command that could change a set point on a controller. And third, the consequences for disruption are different. In IT, a misconfigured policy might block access to an application, while in OT, a misconfigured policy might shut down a production line or trip a safety system or even stop a turbine mid-cycle. So the risk model is not data loss, it's operational disruption and physical safety. So that changes the pace and the method of every enforcement decision.
And that third point is the one that the board needs to understand. OT security is not a faster version of IT security. It's a different discipline with different constraints, different timelines, and different consequences for getting it wrong. So given these constraints, what does a reasonable segmentation approach for OT actually look like? Because telling a plant manager you're going to deploy inline enforcement on day one is a non-starter.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. And this is where most OT security programs fail because they try to apply IT security timelines and IT methods to an environment that cannot absorb them. So the approach has to be phased. And this phasing, it's not optional. It should be built into the design and the architecture, right? So first, we start with visibility in phase one. So before you enforce anything, you need to know what exists. So we need to inventory every device, every communication path, every protocol in that OT environment. And most organizations don't have an accurate asset inventory for their OT network. So you can't segment what you can't see. So this is a passive exercise with no inline devices, no policy changes, and we just monitor, right? And a typical timeline for this phase goes about 30 to 60 days. And in phase two, we move into the passive monitoring and baselining of the traffic. So once you have that visibility, you establish what normal looks like. So which PLCs talk to which historians, and what protocols are in use, and what is the expected traffic pattern. So this creates that behavior baseline that will inform your policy. Now, this is still passive. We are not going to be disrupting any traffic, but now you can start to see the anomalies. You can detect when something talks to something it should not be talking to. And the typical timeline for this phase is about 30 days. So that goes from 60, day 60 to day 90. And the third phase is where active enforcement comes into picture. So only after we have the visibility and a validated baseline, we should begin enforcing segmentation policies. And we start with the least disruptive boundaries first. So we segment the IT from the OT at the convergence point. Then we start to segment within the OT, either by zone or by conduit or both. And we will follow the Purdue model as our reference architecture over here, right? And then over time, we start to tighten the policies within these zones. And this is going to be an ongoing phase. It's not a project with an end date, it's an operating model that should continue going forward.
And I want to stress the timeline here. Visibility in 30 to 60 days, baseline in 60 to 90, enforcement begins at 90 and is ongoing. This is not a 6-week project. This is a 6-month architecture with a multi-year enforcement maturity curve. And the reason the timeline matters is that rushing phase 3 without completing phases 1 and 2 is how you cause the operational disruption that makes the plant manager never trust the security team again. If your organization has OT environments connected to IT, and you do not have a segmentation architecture between them that accounts for industrial protocols, legacy device constraints, and operational continuity requirements, you have a vacuum. The Poland wiper found that vacuum. The next attacker will find yours.
Yes. OT security is no longer a nice to have, right? It's a board level imperative. And ransomware attacks on the industrial environments have increased dramatically. And the convergence of IT and OT networks has created an attack surface that didn't exist 5 years ago. And at ZapSec, we have an OT segmentation readiness assessment that maps your convergence points. And we help you inventory your OT device landscape and design a three-phase segmentation architecture where it starts with visibility. Then we perform an OT risk and exposure assessment with no disruption and no enforcement until the environment is fully understood. We also help companies modernize their OT firewalls and policies, deploying internal OT firewalls and enabling identity aware access policies and enforcing industrial protocol aware policies. And if you want the assessment framework, please reach out to the ZapSec team.
Thanks for the discussion, Hitesh, and thanks to all of you for watching. And don't forget, ZapSec helps companies modernize their infrastructure to maximize ROI and minimize threats. We do OT and IT security every day. If any of this is meaningful to you, we'd welcome a conversation on how to bring this sort of transformation to your organization. Visit zapsec.com or reach out to Hitesh or myself directly. Our email addresses are visible at the beginning of the video.